All right, strap in, everyone. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the utterly bizarre world of the Milky Man.
The Milky Man.
Yeah, this figure pops up everywhere, from ancient folklore to some seriously out there scientific theories.
Sounds intriguing already.
We've got a whole mountain of sources to go through for this one. Myths, urban legends, even psychological studies. Things get weird fast.
Well, let's not waste any time then.
Exactly. So we're dealing with this Milky Man, and honestly, the sources make it hard to tell if he's a real entity, some cultural creation, or maybe even something deeper?
Like a reflection of our anxieties about the world? I can see that.
And the sources themselves, don't even get me started. We're talking interdimensional travel, the fabric of reality warping, maybe even a cosmic dairy deity calling the shots. This is not your average folktale.
Definitely not your average bedtime story.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin? Who is this Milky Man? Where does he come from? What's with his obsession with all things dairy?
Right. And what is this creamscape I keep seeing? It sounds like something out of a fever dream.
Let's start there. Folklore describes the Creamscape as a separate dimension, born from the collision of, get this, a galaxy and a whole lot of spoiled milk.
Okay, that's pretty out there.
And it gets wilder. This dimension is ruled by the Dairy Mother, who some sources say created the Milky Man. Others say she's his mother.
Hold on, so he's got a cosmic dairy mom? What does she do? Pack his lunch with cheese sandwiches?
Maybe, but apparently the Milky Man's job is to maintain some sort of dairy equilibrium between the Creamscape and our world.
Dairy equilibrium, what does that even mean? Is he making sure we all have enough milk for our cereal?
It's not really explained in the folklore, but it suggests a delicate balance. Maybe it's about the flow of dairy between dimensions, or maybe it's symbolic, like a relationship with food and consumption.
Okay, so we've got folklore, but what about the science? There's some pretty mind-bending theories in these sources, too.
Absolutely. One theory is temporal curdling, where space-time is becoming unstable, like curdled milk. The Milky Man is a symptom of that.
So it's like the universe is having a cosmic allergic reaction, and he's the giant milk-spewing hive.
It's a pretty vivid image. The theory says time itself can be disrupted, with events overlapping and impacting each other, like milk going bad. Imagine moments from different points in time all jumbled up. And the Milky Man, he might be a manifestation of these temporal curdles, of being cobbled together from different eras. What's interesting is some physicists believe that a ton of spoiled milk, especially in a galactic collision, could actually create these temporal anomalies. It's theoretical, but the idea that dairy could somehow influence space-time, it keeps popping up in these sources.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around time-curdling the Milky Man as a walking temporal anomaly. It's giving me a whole new perspective on my yogurt.
There's another theory, too, the dairy phantom hypothesis.
Okay, lay it on me.
This one suggests he exists in multiple states at the same time. Solid, liquid, even as one source puts it, pure nightmare fuel. All at once.
So he's less of a milkman and more of a shape-shifting dairy ghost. But why dairy?
Well, here's where the psychology comes in. The studies suggest that encountering the Milky Man can trigger all sorts of bizarre psychological effects.
Like what?
Intense dairy cravings, weird milk-themed dreams, even sudden aversions to certain foods.
So those late-night cheese cravings, that might not just be me. It could be the Milky Man messing with my mind. That's a little unsettling. What's happening in the brain during these encounters?
Well, we might not have a dairy cortex in our brains, but the research suggests certain parts of the brain, probably the reward and memory systems, can be easily manipulated through food associations. It seems the Milky Man can tap into those pathways, trigger cravings, change perceptions, even plant subliminal messages. It could explain why some people feel compelled to eat more dairy after meeting him or develop an aversion to food they used to love. The research is still early, but it's clear his influence goes beyond suggestion. He's messing with our biology, making us crave dairy.
So we have a being that might be a temporal anomaly, a quantum dairy ghost who can make us crave cheese using mind control. Anything else?
Oh, there's more. He also has this ability called reality spoiling. He can actually transform matter into dairy products.
Wait, seriously, like turning a car into a block of cheddar?
Exactly. Walls becoming cheese, rivers flowing with blue milk, you name it. There are reports of him changing buildings into giant mounds of brie, streets coated in butter, even an entire lake turned to yogurt. Total chaos.
That's both terrifying and kind of hilarious. But why do it? Is there a point to this reality spoiling, or is he just a dairy-obsessed vandal?
That question leads us to his motives, which we'll get into later. But first, we need to talk about how he looks. It's a big part of what makes him so unsettling.
All right, bring on the dairy-fueled nightmare. What does this Milky Man actually look like?
Well, that's one of the most disturbing and intriguing things about him. His appearance is constantly shifting, like a grotesque parody of a human face, but made entirely of dairy. Imagine camembert cheese melting, eyes disappearing and reappearing as swirls of cream, a sentient sour cream mustache that seems to stare right through you.
A sentient mustache. Okay, this is getting weird. But is there any consistency to his appearance, or is he just a walking, talking dairy nightmare?
There are a few recurring details. He's often described wearing mismatched socks, with crazy scenes of cows jumping over the moon and milk splashing everywhere. And then there's this hat. It's supposedly woven from something called the Hay of Dreams, and it flickers like it's always on fire.
So he's like a walking dairy-themed fever dream.
And speaking of, you mentioned blue milk earlier. What's the deal with that? It seems to pop up a lot.
Ah, yes. The blue milk elixir. It comes up a lot in both folklore and from people who claim to have seen him. Some think it's a concoction that can bend reality. Imagine a drink that could either grant you cosmic awareness or give you the worst lactose intolerance ever.
Okay, I think my stomach just churned. But we've talked about his origins, his powers, even what he looks like. But has anyone actually seen him? Or is this all just folklore? Well, let's get into the legends and folklore, and maybe one of those well-known is the story of the Dairy Mile. It's a stretch of highway that's infamous for making any dairy products brought there spoil instantly. Your milk curdles in seconds, cheese molds before your eyes, ice cream melts super fast.
The Dairy Mile. That sounds like my personal nightmare. Is it an urban legend or is there something more to it?
It's definitely a local legend, but there are reports from drivers and farmers that make it seem pretty credible. Not only do dairy products spoil incredibly fast there, but local farmers claim their livestock started acting weird after the Dairy Mile phenomena started, producing blue milk, mooing in these eerie, synchronized patterns.
Oh, okay, synchronized mooing. That's both amazing and disturbing. So is it just a place where dairy goes bad or is there evidence of the Milky Man himself?
The Dairy Mile is basically a no-go zone for anyone transporting dairy. It's seen as a place where the Milky Man's power is super strong, almost like a gateway to the Creamscape.
So his personal dairy-themed Bermuda Triangle, but there's more, right? What about the Night of the Curds?
Ah yes, the Night of the Curds. It's a story people whisper about in certain rural communities. The story goes that one summer solstice, an entire village woke up to find all their milk had curdled overnight. No explanation, just unusable curds where fresh milk had been just hours before.
Yeah.
Some villagers say they heard strange whispering and the clinking of a milk bottle during the night.
Sounds like the Milky Man making a house call, but was it just a prank or something more sinister?
Good question. Some people think it was a warning, a sign of his power and maybe his anger that the villagers weren't devoted enough to dairy. Others see it as a test separating the true dairy believers from the rest. Or maybe, just maybe, he was sharing a taste of the Creamscape, a little hint of what he has planned for us.
Okay, cursed highways, curdled villages, and possibly sentient dairy products. But what about the Milky Man himself? What's his deal? What does he want? Why is he doing all this?
That's the million-dollar question. What are the motives of a being who seems to live to spread dairy chaos? Well, some theorists think he's not actually evil. They say he's on a mission, an ancient quest to bring the Creamscape experience to everyone. It's like he sees our reality as missing something essential, and that something is, you guessed it, dairy.
So he's a dairy missionary, spreading the good word of cheese.
There are stories about villages that summoned him by chanting his name 3 times at midnight. They believe he gives them a vision of the Creamscape. Maybe he thinks he's enlightening us, showing us the true power of dairy. Or maybe it's a cruel trick.
So he's either a cosmic dairy missionary or a reality-bending prankster. That's a lot to unpack. But there has to be more to his motives, right? What's really driving him?
To understand the Milky Man, you have to understand his worldview, which, as you might imagine, revolves around dairy. One theory is that he's driven by a quest for dairy supremacy. He seems to believe that dairy is the ultimate food, and anything else, especially plant-based alternatives, is inferior and needs to be eliminated.
So he's like a dairy-obsessed food snob waging war on almond milk.
That's one way to put it. There are stories about him pouring out cartons of plant-based milk, vandalizing vegan restaurants, leaving threatening notes written in curdled cheese. He's not a fan of alternatives.
That's actually kind of funny. But is it just about food, or is there something more going on psychologically?
That's where it gets interesting. Some sources say that beneath all the dairy-fueled rage, the Milky Man might actually be incredibly lonely. Think about it. He exists in this bizarre, isolated dimension, surrounded by sentient dairy and his own madness. Imagine the loneliness of the curdled, if you will.
So he's not just trying to turn the world into a giant cheese wheel, he's desperately seeking connection.
His attempts to drag people into the creamscape, to share this dairy-dominated reality, it could be a desperate attempt to connect with something, anything, outside of his own messed-up existence.
So those late-night cheese cravings, those could be cosmic booty calls from a lonely dairy entity.
That's one way to put it. But it adds another layer to his character. He's not just a one-dimensional villain. He's driven by powerful, albeit strange, motivations. And understanding those is key to understanding his ultimate goal.
All right, so we've got a lonely, dairy-obsessed entity with reality-bending powers and a taste for synchronized mooing. But what's the end game? What does he actually want? Does he just want everyone to join him for a giant cheese tasting in the creamscape?
Well, now we're getting into prophecy territory.
Yeah.
The sources mention this ancient prediction called the Ryan's Return. They say the Milky Man sees this as his destiny, his purpose.
The Rhine's return. That sounds ominous. What's it all about?
According to the prophecy, the Milky Man will one day merge the creamscape with our reality, creating a single existence where dairy rules everything. Buildings made of cheese, rivers of milk, the air smelling like butter. It's terrifying if you're afraid of him, and a glorious vision if you've bought into his dairy-fueled madness.
So he's not just messing around. He wants to remake the world in his image, a world where everything is cheese and milk and butter sculptures.
That seems to be the goal. Everything he does, the reality spoiling, the mind control, it could all be steps towards fulfilling this prophecy. He's breaking down the barriers between our reality and the creamscape, getting ready for the day they become one.
Okay, now I understand why people are so freaked out. But is everyone afraid of him? Surely some people buy into this whole dairy-fueled worldview.
You'd be surprised. There's a whole cult that worships him. They call themselves the disciples of curd, and they see him as a god, the bringer of dairy enlightenment. To them, he's not a threat. He's a path to a higher state of being.
A cult. Seriously, okay, now things are getting really creepy. What do these disciples believe? What kind of rituals do they perform?
The disciples of curd are a fascinating and unsettling group. They believe the Milky Man isn't evil. He's just a misunderstood prophet, a guide to some higher level of dairy consciousness. They don't see the creamscape as a nightmare. They see it as a utopia, a realm of pure dairy bliss.
So they're like extreme dairy enthusiasts who've taken things way too far.
Their devotion runs deep. They think by embracing dairy, eating tons of it, making it central to their lives, they can achieve a state of transcendence, merging with the creamscape. But we'll get into their beliefs and rituals later.
Okay, consider me intrigued and slightly disturbed. Looks like we're going to need a whole lot more milk and maybe some antacids to get through this.
The disciples of curd, they really believe the Milky Man isn't some evil figure, but a misunderstood prophet, like a guide to a higher level of dairy consciousness or something.
So they've gone from just loving cheese to, like, full-on worshiping the source. What makes people go that far?
That's what's so interesting. Their beliefs are complex. They think that by really embracing dairy, not just eating it, but making it their whole life, they can achieve this transcendence, merging with the creamscape.
Hold on, so now it's not enough to enjoy grilled cheese. You got to pledge allegiance to the cheese wheel. It's like a dairy religion. But beliefs are one thing. What about rituals? What are these disciples actually doing?
Their rituals are this strange mix of, like, the normal and the totally bizarre. They leave offerings of sour milk outside their homes, like it'll appease the Milky Man and keep bad spirits away. They start their day by pouring blue milk elixir on their cereal, hoping for visions of the creamscape. And they have these full moon ceremonies, think dancing cows, midnight cheese tastings, chants that go on forever.
Wait, dancing cows? You're serious? Okay, I can't unsee that. But this blue milk, it keeps coming up. It's more than just a weird drink.
It's central to their whole thing. They see it as a sacrament, a way to connect with the Milky Man, the creamscape. Some even think it can alter your consciousness, give you visions.
So it's like their Holy Communion with a side of hallucinations. Sounds risky. But what about joining them? Are there any initiations, special ceremonies for new disciples?
There's this one ritual on the night of a blue moon. They believe the Milky Man chooses one of them to experience the creamscape fully. This person disappears for days, comes back with stories of amazing wonders and horrifying things, and their sanity. It's never the same, they say.
Oh. Wow. Talk about high stakes. A dairy-themed vision quest. Sounds like either a huge honor or a one-way ticket to crazy town.
It's a gamble, for sure. But for the disciples, the risk is worth it. They believe even a quick glimpse of the Creamscape is worth whatever happens to them.
Well, I'm pretty happy with reality as is, thanks. But speaking of, what about those of us who aren't part of this dairy cult? How do we know if we've encountered the Milky Man? Any warning signs?
That's a good question. It seems his influence can be subtle, everyday things that suddenly seem weird. Some people report seeing his face in their coffee foam or in the shadows from streetlights. Others feel uneasy in the dairy aisle, like something's watching them.
So he's like the dairy boogeyman, lurking in the shadows, waiting to mess with our minds. It's like a psychological thriller. Any more specific examples?
Oh yeah, some truly creepy stories. People seeing his ghostly form on their stairs at night with this creepy grin on his melting face. Others hear his voice from inside their fridge, telling them to eat more cheese. It's almost like he's testing the boundaries between our reality and his, looking for weaknesses, people he can influence.
Okay, I'm definitely sleeping with the lights on tonight, but this raises a big question. Is the Milky Man good or evil? Or is he something else, something we can't categorize? I mean, he does creepy things, but he also seems driven by this loneliness, this need to connect. It's almost sympathetic in a weird way.
That's the mystery, right? The sources don't give a straight answer. Some say he's a trickster deity messing things up for fun. Others say he's a sign of the end of the world as we know it. And then there are the disciples who see him as a savior, offering a path to a better existence, even if it's paved with cheese.
So he's a cosmic wild card with a dairy fetish. A lot to process. But what does it all mean for us normal folks? Should we be stocking up on cheese or boarding up our fridges?
I think the takeaway here is that the Milky Man represents the unexpected, the stuff we don't understand. He reminds us that reality might be more fragile than we think, and that even ordinary things, like milk or cheese, can have hidden depths, unsettling possibilities.
He reminds us that the universe is full of mysteries, and some of them might be hiding in our fridge. Speaking of mysteries, we've only just scratched the surface of the Milky Man.
There's so much more to explore. The Rhine's return prophecy, the disciples' beliefs and practices, and maybe most importantly, what it all means for humanity.
Right, we've got a lot more ground to cover. And I have a feeling it's going to get even weirder. So we're back, and I'm still trying to process this whole cult thing. These people see the Milky Man not as some creepy, reality-bending weirdo, but as a god. It's kind of hard to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, it really shows how people look for meaning, even in the strangest places. To the disciples, the Milky Man is powerful, a connection to something bigger than themselves. It gives them comfort.
It makes you think about belief. What makes people embrace these, let's face it, unconventional beliefs? Is it wanting to belong, finding meaning in a world that doesn't make sense, or maybe just wanting something more than the everyday?
Could be all of those things. The disciples, they find community, purpose, a sense of something special in their devotion to the Milky Man. Their beliefs might seem weird to us, but it shows how much humans need connection, something beyond the ordinary.
True. What seems bizarre to one person can be totally meaningful to another. But let's get back to the disciples' beliefs, specifically the Rhine's return prophecy. What's that all about?
The Rhine's return is like the central belief of the disciples. It predicts that one day, the Milky Man will merge the Creamscape with our reality, making one giant dairy-filled existence. They think this will bring peace, abundance, everyone experiencing the bliss of the Creamscape.
So it's their idea of a perfect world. But what about those of us who aren't into the whole cheese-topia thing? What happens to us in this prophecy?
That's where things get a little fuzzy. Some say those who reject the Milky Man and his whole dairy obsession will get left behind, stuck in a decaying, non-dairy reality. Others think everyone will be transformed, whether they want it or not, becoming part of this new dairy existence.
Sounds like a pretty big deal. Embrace the cheese, or else. But back to the rituals. You mentioned they leave sour milk, but what else do they do to connect with the Milky Man?
They've got a lot of different rituals, daily stuff like chanting these dairy-themed mantras while making coffee, weekly gatherings where they eat tons of cheese, drink blue milk, hoping to see the Creamscape. They even do these dances with cows and all sorts of dairy imagery. They think it pleases the Milky Man, brings them closer to their goal of merging with the Creamscape.
It's all so weird and kind of creepy, but also kind of fascinating. Makes you wonder what the Milky Man thinks of all this. Does he like the attention? Does he even care?
That's the big question, isn't it? Is he manipulating his followers, using them for his own goals? Or are they just pawns in some big cosmic game? The sources don't really say, so we're left wondering about their relationship.
So we've got this weird entity, maybe manipulating a bunch of followers, all to turn reality into a dairy wonderland. And at the heart of it is this Rhine's return prophecy, which is either hopeful or terrifying, depending who you ask. It's a lot to digest.
It's a reminder that reality's full of mysteries. And sometimes those mysteries involve cheese and a talking mustache. But maybe that's what makes it so interesting. We end up with more questions than answers, trying to understand something that might be stranger than we can imagine.
That's a great way to put it. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the weird, cheesy world of the Milky Man. We've explored his origins, powers, motives, even the cult that worships him. We've been to the Creamscape, met a sentient mustache, and learned about a prophecy that could change everything.
It's been a wild ride.
To our listeners, the next time you have a glass of milk or a slice of pizza, remember what we talked about today. Remember that something strange, maybe wonderful, maybe just strange, might be out there, just beyond what we can see.
And remember to be open-minded, even when the truth is stranger than fiction, and maybe a little bit cheesy.
Until next time, stay curious, everyone, and maybe think twice about that extra slice of cheese. You never know who might be watching.